was thoroughly impressed with this show for so many reasons. Now, before I get into my review, I'd just like to say I'm not the biggest fan of the Addams Family. I've never really been interested in that particular franchise. The only reason I actually watched the show is because of Tim Burton, a great director, and Jenna Ortega, who I think is a great actor, and I think they did amazing in both of their fields. What I was surprised about this show is, even though the rating of it was a 12 by Netflix, the amount of gore that was portrayed on screen was somewhat shocking. I really wasn't expecting it, and it added more to the show, personally. Also, the effects in this show, not only with the monsters, but I think with the creature, the thing, was quite remarkable, and credit goes to everyone who made that. Now, because the show is set in Nevermore, which is a school, and obviously these kids are somewhat treated as they're outcasts and have powers, it gave me Harry Potter vibes, but in the most respectful way possible. And I've really enjoyed that. Within this show, we see each and every one of these characters having their own mini little plot, and even with the teachers to an extent having their own existential crises and such forth. And I really enjoyed that everyone had their own interesting story, especially with the teachers, but I think that when it comes to teachers, theirs weren't outshining the students, which I really did enjoy. Very Harry Potter-esque. When it came to the plot, I was really interested. I think story-wise, every now and then you'd have an odd episode where you think it's drifting from a completely different plot, and it does put you off. It's only until you finish the show that you realise that these little plot points are all connecting, and it's like a massive puzzle, and this was just a small but very important piece to go into this massive one. It really was a great way to tell a story. Another way to tell a story is how we are as clueless as the characters, as in, we don't know any more details about the plot than the characters themselves, and so we're as in the dark as they are, which I think was a really interesting narrative point. Now, when it came to characters, I thoroughly enjoyed the character of Wednesday Addams. She brings a lot of great sense of humour to the show through morbid one-liner quips, which I think she does amazing, and not only with just her character bringing the humour, but the reaction of others. I think that was very great. Her character also just being herself, I really enjoyed. It was nice seeing that she wasn't following cliques or being someone else. She was being her genuine self. I think that was really cool about her. Now, when she did enter Nevermore, I was getting the somewhat vibes of she feels like I'm Miss Perfect at everything. As she goes in and literally challenges the first person who seems somewhat skillful at fencing. And I'm kind of glad that she kind of lost, as it shows that she's not the best at everything. She is just a genuine person, and she somewhat had a little bit of an ego trip. I did enjoy that. But one of the main things I loved about her character is, even though she comes off as emotionless, she does have two particular scenes where she shows herself as quite vulnerable. The first being when she's having a conversation with her mother, and she kind of goes into quite an emotional vulnerability, where she says to her mum, why bother competing, join these cliques and these events, when all I'm going to have is people compare me to you, saying how I'm very like you, I've done this and done that, and she'll always be in her shadow. And it's really interesting to see her show that quite vulnerable side of herself, that she wants to be herself, but it's always put in a position of, oh, you're very like your mother, it's going to annoy you. And the second time, which I think is more interesting, I hope they have more scenes like this, is when a friend of hers is in the somewhat state of losing their lives. You can see that as she's fighting for this person to live, she's getting really upset, and she does her best to hide it, but we as the audience are seeing it. It's really quite interesting to see her character show vulnerability to this effect. When it came to supporting characters, I think they were all great, but two of my favourites. First being her roommate Enid, who we see as somewhat a social butterfly, the complete opposite to Wednesday, all colourful and trying to be as nice as possible to her, and having her own issues. And I like that ever since meeting Wednesday, we see a bit of her, Wednesday rubbing off on her, seeing her being a bit more rebellious. I really did enjoy that. And then when it came to my other favourite character, supporting wise, was the character Eugene, who was just quite of a nerdy type character, and I just liked him as a person. He seemed quite interesting and cool, even if he was a real outcast in the outcast world. He does somewhat get treated like that and doesn't really shine up until the last episode. He disappears for, I'm not going to say why, but it's after, in the last episode, he has his shining moment. I think it did really great strides with his character. It makes him more interesting to us, the audience, and maybe makes him interesting in the show. Like, characters might take him a bit more seriously, so we might see him blow up a bit more, which I hope so. I really liked his character. When it comes to the show, honestly, I have very little to critique. The only thing which is not related to the show itself, but more a producer, he was asked about the show and he made an off remark about it being 8 mini movies. Now, it bothers me because I feel like this is a producer who's new to the TV world, and with most movie producers, they somewhat have a disdain for TV. At least this is how it come off. Especially how the creator of The Boys, Eric Kripke, he somewhat saw it as this as well. And he went off a huge rant, and I completely agree with him. Some people just take TV as a low, downgraded thing compared to movies. Now, I understand from an early 20th century thing that yes, movies were way better than television, but I think nowadays television is the huge thing. Movies have subsided, if anything. That's just my personal opinion. I think I'm more excited to hear about announcements of TV shows than films, but again, that's just me. So is it good? I'd say it's great. I think if you're a fan of the Addams Family, you'll definitely enjoy it. If you haven't seen the Addams Family, I think this is definitely the perfect show to introduce you into that. Rating wise, I'd give it a 9 out of 10. Now, because like I said earlier, I'm not a huge fan of the Addams Family, I don't know if I can recommend it. Now, what I can recommend is Tim Burton. I think he's a great director, and 2 of my favourite films of his are Batman and Batman Returns. Brilliant Batman films. Definitely go check them out. Next is Jenna Ortega, the main character, the titular character of the show. I think she was brilliant, and I think you should definitely check her out in the TV show You. That is where I first saw her in that TV appearance. Did an amazing job in You Season 2. She was brilliant in Scream, the latest one. She's also going to be in the sequel, so I can't wait to see that. And I've heard great things about her in the A24 film X. Haven't seen it myself, but I've heard very good things about it. Those are my recommendations. This has been my review. Hope you've had a good day.